Story disclaimer. This story is a work of fiction and is intended for entertainment purposes only. The content includes dark themes, horror elements, and fictional depictions of rituals and sacrifices that are purely imaginative and not reflective of any real-life practices or beliefs. Viewer discretion is advised. This video is not suitable for younger audiences, and parental guidance is recommended. The story does not endorse or promote any harmful behavior, violence, or dangerous activities. Please note that all characters, events, and settings are entirely fictional and created for the purpose of storytelling. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or actual events, is purely coincidental. In this episode, Ekundayo's battle against the shadow reaches a breaking point. As he ventures deeper into the forest, the darkness becomes a relentless, living force that strikes when he least expects it. He encounters an ancient witch with knowledge of the shadow's true power and learns of a dangerous ritual that may be his only hope, but at a terrible cost. As the stakes climb higher, Ekundayo is forced to confront the shadow in a twisted, nightmarish form, leading to a perilous descent into a bottomless chasm known as the pit. Here, he comes face to face with the heart of darkness itself, and in a final, desperate act, Ekundayo must summon the light within him to banish the shadow once and for all. But even in victory, the forest's secrets linger, and his journey is far from complete. Ekundayo pressed on through the forest, his nerves on edge. The shadows seemed to close in tighter around him, their whispers growing louder and more insistent. The air was thick with tension, and every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig made him jump. He knew the shadow was nearby, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The darkness had become more than just a presence in his mind, it was a living force, something that could physically manifest and cause harm. He had seen it attack his mother, and he knew it was capable of much worse. As he moved deeper into the forest, the path became less distinct, the underbrush thicker and more difficult to navigate. The trees loomed overhead like twisted sentinels, their branches reaching out like claws. The farther he went, the more isolated he felt. It was as if the forest itself was conspiring against him, guiding him into a trap. Then, without warning, the shadows attacked. They came from all sides, swirling around him in a vortex of darkness. Ekundayo barely had time to react before he was enveloped in a cocoon of shadowy tendrils that squeezed the air from his lungs and immobilized his limbs. The pressure was immense, crushing, and the whispers in his mind turned into a deafening roar. "You cannot escape," the shadow's voice echoed in his mind. "You are mine, Ekundayo. You belong to the darkness." Ekundayo struggled against the tendrils, but they were too strong, too overwhelming. The shadow's influence seeped into his mind, filling him with fear and despair. His vision darkened, and for a moment, he felt himself slipping away, consumed by the very force he had sought to defeat. But just as he was about to give in, something deep within him stirred, the spark of defiance, of determination. He had fought the shadow before, and he had survived. He couldn't let it win now. With a burst of strength, Ekundayo focused all his energy on the ceremonial dagger in his hand. The blade, once lifeless, began to glow with a faint light, a remnant of the magic that Baba Adisa had told him about. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Ekundayo slashed at the tendrils, the blade cutting through the darkness like a hot knife through butter. The tendrils recoiled, hissing in pain, and the pressure around him eased. The light from the dagger grew brighter, pushing back the shadows that sought to consume him. "You will not take me," Ekundayo shouted, his voice filled with newfound resolve. "I will fight you to the end." The shadow let out a furious roar, the vortex around Ekundayo swirling faster, more violently. But the light from the dagger held firm, creating a small bubble of protection around him. The shadow's power was great, but it was not invincible. With each slash of the dagger, Ekundayo pushed the shadows back, forcing them to retreat. The darkness still pressed in from all sides, but it was losing ground. The whispers in his mind grew fainter, the roar of the shadow's voice receding. Finally, with one last burst of energy, Ekundayo drove the dagger into the ground. A shockwave of light radiated out from the point of impact, blasting the shadows away and leaving him standing alone in the forest. The air was still, the darkness banished, for now. But Ekundayo knew this was only a temporary victory. The shadow had retreated, but it was far from defeated. It was still out there, lurking in the depths of the forest, waiting for another chance to strike. Breathing heavily, Ekundayo stood up and surveyed his surroundings. The forest was quiet once more, but the sense of danger remained. He had bought himself some time, but he needed to find a safe place to rest and gather his strength. The battle was far from over. With renewed determination, Ekundayo continued his journey, his senses alert for any sign of the shadow's return. He knew the path ahead would be difficult, but he was resolved to see it through to the end. He would not let the darkness win. As Ekundayo ventured deeper into the forest, he noticed a change in the atmosphere. The air grew colder, and the trees seemed older, their trunks thicker and their branches more gnarled. The shadows still lingered at the edges of his vision, but they were less aggressive now, almost as if they were watching and waiting. After hours of walking, Ekundayo came across something unexpected, a small, dilapidated hut hidden among the trees. It was old, the wood rotting and the roof sagging, but there was a faint light flickering inside, barely visible through the cracked windows. Cautiously, Ekundayo approached the hut. He could feel the presence of magic, old and powerful, emanating from within. This was no ordinary dwelling, it belonged to someone who understood the ways of the forest, someone who might be able to help him. He knocked on the door, his heart pounding with anticipation. The sound echoed through the quiet forest, and for a moment there was no response. Then, the door creaked open, revealing an old woman standing in the doorway. She was hunched over, her face lined with age, her eyes sharp and piercing. "Who are you, boy?" the old woman asked, her voice raspy and full of suspicion. Her eyes narrowed as she studied Ekundayo, as if she could see right through him. "My name is Ekundayo," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "I've been fighting a shadow that has cursed my village. I need help." The old woman's gaze softened slightly, but she didn't move from the doorway. "A shadow, you say?" "I felt its presence in the forest. It's strong, ancient. Few have the strength to stand against it, yet here you are." Ekundayo nodded, his exhaustion evident. "I've managed to fight it off so far, but it's growing stronger. I don't know how much longer I can keep it at bay." The woman's eyes seemed to pierce into his very soul. "Come inside, child. We have much to discuss." She stepped aside, allowing Ekundayo to enter the hut. Inside, it was small and cluttered, filled with strange artifacts and jars of mysterious ingredients. The air was thick with the scent of herbs and smoke from a small fire burning in the hearth. The old woman gestured for Ekundayo to sit at a wooden table in the center of the room. She moved with surprising grace for someone her age, and Ekundayo couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. There was power in this place, and it made him wary. The woman sat across from him, her eyes never leaving his face. "I am called Mama Koto," she said. "I have lived in this forest for many years, longer than most can remember. I have seen the rise and fall of many things, but this shadow, it is different. It is a darkness that seeks to consume, and it has chosen you as its vessel." Ekundayo swallowed hard. "I never wanted this. I just wanted to protect my village." Mama Koto nodded slowly. "The shadows choose their victims carefully. They seek out those with strength, those who can be bent to their will. But they are also drawn to fear, to doubt. You have fought well, but the darkness has taken root within you. What can I do?" Ekundayo asked, his voice trembling. "How do I stop it?" The old witch leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. "There is a way, but it is dangerous, and it may cost you more than you are willing to give. The shadow's power is tied to an ancient ritual, one that binds it to this world. To break its hold, you must perform a counter-ritual, one that will sever the connection and banish the shadow back to the spirit realm. But there's a catch, isn't there? Ekundayo asked, sensing the gravity of her words. Mama Koto's eyes darkened. Yes. The ritual requires a sacrifice, one of great personal significance. The shadow will not let go easily, and it will fight you every step of the way. You must be prepared to face your deepest fears, to confront the darkness within yourself. Ekundayo's heart sank. He had already lost so much: his home, the trust of his village, his sense of safety. What more could he sacrifice? But he knew there was no other choice. If he didn't do this, the shadow would consume everything he held dear. I'll do it, Ekundayo said, his voice filled with determination. Tell me what I need to do. Mama Koto nodded, her expression grave. The ritual must be performed at the heart of the forest, where the boundary between our world and the spirit realm is weakest. You must gather the ingredients I will give you, and then, when the time is right, you will offer your sacrifice. But be warned, Ekundayo, the shadow will fight you with everything it has. You must not waver, or you will be lost. With that, Mama Koto began to gather the necessary items for the ritual: strange herbs, a piece of red cloth, a small vial of liquid that glowed faintly in the dim light. As she worked, Ekundayo couldn't help but feel the weight of what he was about to do. This was his last chance. If he failed, the shadow would consume him and everything he loved. But if he succeeded, he might finally be free of the darkness that had haunted him for so long. As the old witch finished her preparations, she handed Ekundayo the items with a solemn expression. Remember, child, the shadow knows your heart. It will use your fears against you, try to break you. But if you are strong, truly strong, you can overcome it. Ekundayo took the items and nodded, his resolve hardening. He had come this far, faced so much. He couldn't turn back now. Thank you, Mama Koto, he said quietly. The old witch gave him a sad smile. May the spirits watch over you, Ekundayo. And may you find the strength to do what must be done. With that, Ekundayo left the hut, the weight of the ritual pressing down on him like a physical burden. The forest seemed darker and more menacing as he made his way to the heart of the woods. The shadows whispered around him, sensing the impending confrontation. He was alone, but he knew that this was the only way. The final battle was approaching, and Ekundayo could feel the darkness gathering, preparing for the moment when it would strike. The journey to the heart of the forest was long and treacherous. The path was overgrown, the trees twisted and ancient, their branches forming a canopy so dense that hardly any light could penetrate. The deeper Ekundayo ventured, the colder and darker the forest became. The shadows seemed to move with him, their whispers growing louder and more insistent. As he walked, Ekundayo clutched the items Mama Koto had given him. The red cloth felt heavy in his hand, and the vial of glowing liquid pulsed with an eerie light. The weight of what he was about to do pressed down on him, but he knew there was no turning back. Finally, after what felt like hours, Ekundayo reached the heart of the forest. It was a small clearing, surrounded by ancient trees whose roots twisted and coiled like serpents. In the center of the clearing was a large stone altar, covered in moss and etched with strange, ancient symbols. The air here was thick with magic, and Ekundayo could feel the presence of the spirit realm just beyond the veil of reality. This was the place where the ritual would take place, where he would confront the shadow once and for all. Ekundayo approached the altar, his heart pounding in his chest. The shadows around him grew darker, more oppressive, as if sensing what was about to happen. The air was filled with the sound of rustling leaves and distant whispers, but there was no turning back now. He laid out the items on the altar, arranging them according to Mama Koto's instructions. The red cloth, the herbs, the vial of liquid, all placed with careful precision. As he walked, the air around him seemed to grow heavier, the shadows pressing in from all sides. Once everything was in place, Ekundayo took a deep breath and began the ritual. He recited the words Mama Koto had taught him, his voice steady but filled with emotion. The language was ancient, the words unfamiliar, but they resonated with power. As he spoke, the symbols on the altar began to glow, casting a faint light over the clearing. The shadows around him writhed and twisted, as if in pain. Ekundayo could feel their anger, their desperation. They knew what he was doing, and they were fighting back. As the ritual progressed, the air grew colder, and a strong wind began to blow through the clearing. The trees groaned and creaked, their branches swaying violently. The shadows surged forward, trying to disrupt the ritual, but Ekundayo held firm, his voice growing louder, more confident. Then, as he reached the final part of the ritual, Ekundayo felt a sudden, intense pain in his chest. It was as if the shadow had reached inside him, gripping his heart with icy fingers. He gasped, his hand clutching the spot where the pain radiated, but he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. "You think you can banish me?" the shadow's voice echoed in his mind, filled with fury. "You are nothing without me. You are weak, powerless. You will fail." Ekundayo gritted his teeth, fighting through the pain. "I am not afraid of you," he shouted, his voice trembling but strong. "You do not control me." The shadow laughed, a cold, mocking sound. "You will see, Ekundayo. You will see." With a final burst of energy, Ekundayo completed the ritual. The vial of liquid shattered, and the red cloth burst into flames. The symbols on the altar blazed with light, then a shockwave of energy rippled through the clearing. The shadows screamed, a sound that echoed through the forest, filled with rage and pain. The darkness around Ekundayo convulsed, the tendrils of shadow retreating as the light from the ritual burned through them. But even as the shadows retreated, Ekundayo knew this was not the end. The shadow was not gone, it had merely been weakened, forced back into the depths from which it came. But it would return, stronger and more determined than ever. As the light from the ritual faded, the clearing fell silent. The wind died down, the shadows that had once swirled around Ekundayo now dissipated into the night. He stood alone in the eerie quiet, his heart pounding from the intensity of the ritual. For a moment he dared to hope that it was over, that he had finally broken the shadow's grip on him and his village. But deep down, he knew better. The shadow wasn't truly gone, it was merely biding its time, waiting for another opportunity to strike. The ritual had weakened it, yes, but it was far from defeated. As Ekundayo gathered the remnants of the ritual, his mind was clouded with doubt. The sense of victory was hollow, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The air around him was thick with unease, and the forest seemed to be holding its breath, as if anticipating something dreadful. Suddenly, a low growl echoed from the darkness of the trees. Ekundayo froze, his hand instinctively reaching for the ceremonial dagger. His eyes scanned the shadows, trying to pinpoint the source of the sound. The growl came again, closer this time, and it was followed by the rustling of leaves and the snapping of twigs. Then, from the darkness, a figure emerged. It was a creature unlike anything Ekundayo had ever seen, a twisted, nightmarish beast with glowing red eyes and a body made entirely of shadow. Its form shifted and flickered, as if it were only half real, and its presence filled Ekundayo with a deep, primal fear. The creature snarled, baring sharp, gleaming teeth. It was the physical manifestation of the shadow, a being born from the darkness that had plagued Ekundayo for so long. And now, it had come for him. Without hesitation, the creature lunged at Ekundayo, its claws outstretched. He barely had time to react, throwing himself to the side as the beast's claws slashed through the air where he had stood. The creature moved with unnatural speed and agility, its form blurring as it charged at him again. Ekundayo raised the dagger, the blade glowing faintly in the darkness. He knew the dagger's magic was his only defense against the creature, but he also knew it wouldn't be enough to defeat it. He had to find a way to survive, to escape, until he could figure out how to truly banish the shadow once and for all. The creature attacked again, its movements fluid and deadly. Ekundayo parried with the dagger, the blade cutting through the shadowy flesh of the beast. The creature howled in pain, but it didn't slow down. It was relentless, driven by a single purpose, to destroy Ekundayo. As they fought, Ekundayo realized that the creature was more than just a physical threat. It was a manifestation of the shadow's will, its hatred and anger given form. The longer they fought, the stronger the creature seemed to become, feeding off Ekundayo's fear and desperation. He needed to do something, and fast. The ritual had weakened the shadow, but it hadn't destroyed it. If he couldn't banish it completely, it would keep coming back, stronger each time. As the creature lunged at him once more, Ekundayo dodged to the side, his mind racing. He needed to find a way to turn the shadow's power against itself, to trap it within its own darkness. But how? Then, an idea struck him, the dangerous, desperate idea. If the shadow fed on fear and despair, then perhaps he could use that against it. He could lure the creature into a trap, a place where its own power would become its downfall. But it would require something risky, something that could cost Ekundayo everything if he failed. Gathering his courage, Ekundayo began to lead the creature away from the clearing, deeper into the forest. The beast followed, its red eyes glowing with malevolent intent. Ekundayo's heart pounded with both fear and determination as he ran, the creature hot on his heels. He knew where he was heading, a place deep within the forest, a place of darkness and death. The villagers called it the pit, a bottomless chasm that was said to be a gateway to the spirit realm. No one who ventured near it ever returned, and the stories of those who had disappeared were enough to keep even the bravest villagers away. But Ekundayo had no choice. The pit was his only hope of trapping the creature, of using its own power against it. He just hoped he would survive the encounter. The deeper Ekundayo ventured into the forest, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The trees grew taller and more twisted, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the ground beneath his feet was sleek with moisture, as if the earth itself was rotting away. The creature followed closely, its growls low and menacing. Ekundayo could feel its hot breath on the back of his neck, the stench of death clinging to it like a shroud. He was running out of time, he needed to reach the pit before the creature caught him. After what felt like an eternity of running, Ekundayo finally reached the edge of the pit. It was a massive chasm, its depths shrouded in darkness. The air around it was colder, and the ground seemed to tremble as if the pit itself was alive, hungry for whatever ventured too close. Ekundayo skidded to a stop at the edge, his heart pounding in his chest. The creature halted a few paces behind him, its red eyes narrowing as it realized where they were. For a moment, there was silence, the calm before the storm. Then, with a roar of fury, the creature charged at Ekundayo, its claws outstretched. Ekundayo braced himself, knowing that this was his only chance. At the last possible moment, he sidestepped, using the creature's own momentum against it. The beast skidded to a stop at the very edge of the pit, its claws digging into the earth to keep from falling. It let out a snarl of frustration, its glowing eyes locked onto Ekundayo. But Ekundayo wasn't finished yet. He raised the ceremonial dagger, its blade still glowing faintly, then spoke the final words of the ritual. The air around the pit grew colder, the shadows deepening as the magic took hold. The creature howled in pain as the ritual's magic began to pull at it, dragging it toward the pit's edge. It fought against the pull, its claws gouging deep furrows in the ground, but the magic was too strong. The shadows around it seemed to come alive, wrapping around the creature's limbs like chains, pulling it closer to the chasm. Ekundayo watched, his heart in his throat, as the creature struggled. He knew this was his only chance to banish the shadow for good. But as the creature was dragged closer to the edge, its eyes locked onto Ekundayo's, and he saw something that made his blood run cold. The creature smiled, a dark, twisted smile that sent chills down Ekundayo's spine. It wasn't afraid. It wasn't panicking. It had been leading him here all along. Before Ekundayo could react, the creature lunged forward with a final burst of strength, its claws sinking into the ground beneath Ekundayo's feet. The earth crumbled away, and Ekundayo found himself teetering on the edge of the pit, the creature's grip pulling him down. "No!" Ekundayo shouted, struggling to break free. But the creature's strength was immense, and the ground beneath him was giving way. He could feel the cold darkness of the pit reaching up for him, pulling him down into its depths. With a final, desperate effort, Ekundayo plunged the dagger into the creature's shadowy flesh. The blade pierced through, and the creature let out a scream of agony, its grip loosening just enough for Ekundayo to break free. But it was too late. The ground beneath him gave way, and Ekundayo fell. Ekundayo tumbled into the pit, his body spinning in freefall as darkness swallowed him whole. The air around him was frigid, the cold seeping into his bones as he plunged deeper into the chasm. There was no sound, no light, only the sensation of falling endlessly into the abyss. He tried to scream, but the sound was ripped from his throat by the rushing wind. Panic gripped him as he plummeted, his mind racing with fear and desperation. The pit had no bottom, he was certain of it now. It was a gateway to another realm, a place where the laws of the physical world no longer applied. Just as Ekundayo began to lose hope, the descent slowed. The darkness around him thickened, becoming almost tangible, like a thick, suffocating fog. His body felt weightless, suspended in the void, and he realized with a start that he was no longer falling, he was floating. The air was still and heavy, the silence oppressive. Ekundayo's heart pounded in his chest as he tried to make sense of his surroundings, but there was nothing, only the darkness, stretching out in all directions. Then, from the void, a voice echoed, a deep, resonant voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "You have entered my domain, Ekundayo," the voice said, its tone both commanding and mocking. "You have come seeking to banish me, but you have only succeeded in bringing yourself to the very heart of the darkness." Ekundayo's blood ran cold. The voice was the shadow's, more powerful and ominous than ever. He tried to move, to reach for the dagger that had saved him so many times before, but his limbs felt heavy and unresponsive, as though they were bound by the very darkness that surrounded him. "Did you really think you could escape me?" the shadow continued, its laughter reverberating through the void. "You are mine, Ekundayo. You have always been mine. From the moment you first saw me in the forest, your fate was sealed." Ekundayo struggled to speak, to fight back against the despair that threatened to overwhelm him. "I won't give up," he managed to say, his voice a mere whisper in the darkness. "I will find a way to defeat you." The shadow's laughter grew louder, more sinister. "Defeat me? You are but a child, playing with forces you cannot comprehend. You are in my realm now, where I am strongest. Here, I am eternal. Here, I am invincible." Ekundayo felt a crushing weight on his chest, as if the darkness itself were pressing down on him, suffocating him. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The shadow's presence was overwhelming, filling his mind with images of despair and hopelessness. He saw his village, consumed by darkness, the people he loved twisted into monstrous forms, their faces contorted in pain and fear. He saw his mother, lying lifeless on the ground, her eyes staring blankly into the void. He saw himself, consumed by the shadow, his body and soul lost forever in the abyss. "No!" Ekundayo screamed, fighting against the visions. "This isn't real. I won't let you win." The darkness around him seemed to pulse with anger, the shadow's voice turning cold and furious. "You think you can resist me? You think you can deny your fate? You are nothing without me, Ekundayo. Nothing." The images in his mind grew more intense, more horrifying. But deep within him, the spark of defiance remained, the spark that refused to be extinguished. With every ounce of strength he had left, Ekundayo focused on that spark, nurturing it, willing it to grow. He thought of his mother, of Baba Adisa, of the villagers who still needed him. He thought of the promise he had made to protect them, to save them from the darkness. Slowly, the spark grew into a flame, small but bright, cutting through the suffocating darkness. The weight on his chest began to lift, and Ekundayo could feel the strength returning to his limbs. "I am not yours," Ekundayo said, his voice growing stronger. "I am not nothing. I have the strength to fight you, to overcome you." The darkness recoiled as the flame within Ekundayo grew, pushing back the shadow's influence. The images of despair faded, replaced by memories of love and hope, his mother's smile, Baba Adisa's wisdom, the laughter of the villagers. These were the things that gave him strength, that made him who he was. The shadow hissed, its voice laced with venom. "You are a fool, Ekundayo. You cannot win. You cannot." But the shadow's words were cut off as the flame within Ekundayo burst into a brilliant light, illuminating the void around him. The darkness shrieked in pain, retreating from the light that now surrounded Ekundayo. For the first time, the shadow sounded afraid. "No, this cannot be. You cannot." Ekundayo felt the light within him grow, fueled by his determination and the love he held for those he had vowed to protect. The darkness continued to retreat, unable to withstand the force of the light. "I will banish you," Ekundayo said, his voice filled with resolve. "I will end this, once and for all." With that, the light around him exploded outward, flooding the void with its brilliance. The shadow let out one final, ear-piercing scream before it was consumed by the light, its form disintegrating into nothingness. The void trembled, the darkness shattering like glass. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. Ekundayo found himself lying on solid ground, the oppressive weight of the darkness gone. The air was warm, filled with the sounds of birdsong and rustling leaves. He opened his eyes, blinking against the bright sunlight that filtered through the trees above him. He was back in the forest, at the edge of the pit. But the pit was no longer the gaping chasm of darkness it had been before. The ground was solid, covered in grass and wildflowers, as if the pit had never existed. Ekundayo sat up, his body aching but whole. The ceremonial dagger lay beside him, its blade dull but intact. He picked it up, feeling a sense of peace and relief wash over him. The shadow was gone, banished to the spirit realm, never to return. But as Ekundayo stood, he knew that his journey was not yet over. He had faced the darkness within himself and emerged victorious, but there were still questions that needed answers, still mysteries to be unraveled. With renewed determination, Ekundayo began the long walk back to the village, the light of the sun guiding his way. As Ekundayo is still trying to find answers to all the questions in his mind, will he find the way back to the village, and is he prepared to cope with what is expecting him there? You will find out in the next episode.